Hello, and welcome to Scholars Hub at Home. I'm Carrie Williams, Associate Director of Alumni Events here at York University. Thank you for joining us today. This webinar is part of our Scholars Hub speaker series, which features timely and relevant educational lectures by academics from York. We're pleased to be able to bring this series online to allow even more alumni and friends to hear from some of the university's leading scholars. As this event is virtual and we are not all gathered in the same space, we recognize that the following land acknowledgement might not be for the territory that you are currently on. We ask that if this is the case, you take responsibility to acknowledge the traditional territory you are on, as well as the current treaty holders. As a member of the York University community, I recognize many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with upon the territories that York campuses are located that precede the establishment of the university. York acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Takronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation Inuit and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably care and share for the Great Lakes region. I'd like to share some exciting news with you about an upcoming event. For the past 20 years, the Bryden Alumni Awards has celebrated alumni who have changed the world for the better. The tradition of recognizing their contributions will continue at the York U Alumni Celebration, honoring 20 years of Bryden Awards, a virtual event which will take place tomorrow from 7 to 8 p.m. The event will bring together 20 years of award winners with York's global community of alumni, friends, students, and York leaders for an entertaining and inspiring evening. It will also feature York alumni celebrity guests, including Cardinal Fischel, The Social's Melissa Grello, and Cynthia Loist, and others. We're thrilled to be able to offer complimentary tickets for this event and hope you can attend. You may RSVP today at yorku.ca/alumni and friends/Bryden. And just a couple of days later, on November 22nd, on the Saturday, I'm happy to announce that the York Circle at Home lecture series will return. You may join our host, Dr. Rebecca Pillay-Riddell, the academic chair for the York Circle, for the second session in our four-part series. This Saturday's session is titled COVID-19 Vaccine, Production, Policy, and Politics. Again, you may visit yorku.ca/alumni and friends, select York Circle from the events menu to learn more. We look forward to seeing you at one or both of these upcoming events. As those of you who have joined from previous events will know, we always like to get to know our audience a bit better by asking a question. And today's question is, how often have you attended Scholars Hub at Home since the beginning of September? The poll should pop up, it's up in your screen right now, and I'll just give everybody a moment to respond. It's always helpful to know who our audience is, and part of this helps us with our planning for the new year. Now, if you need help with Zoom webinar at any point, please feel free to click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and enter your question. Our team is here to help you. That button should also be used to submit any questions that you have for our speakers today, and as we will, as always, have a Q&A session at the end. And for those of you who are watching live on Facebook, feel free to submit any questions or comments through the comment section of the video, and the team will send them my way. Today's talk is titled Addressing Rights to Accommodation in Education Placements, featuring Iris Epstein, Assistant Professor of Nursing, Faculty of Health, Katie McEntire, Research Associate, Faculty of Health, Roxanne McTipkyuk, Professor, Osgoode Hall Law School, and Brooke Magel, Master's Student, School of Health, Policy and Management, Faculty of Health. Iris Epstein is an assistant professor in the School of Nursing, Faculty of Health, York University. Iris's program of research focuses on outcomes emerging from the intersect between health, technology, and place using mixed methods, design, disability, and pedagogy, video, and storytelling methods. Dr. McEntee is a research associate at York University. Her research focuses on integrating self-filming, digital storytelling, photo voice, and drawing internationally and with diverse communities working to address HIV and AIDS, my apologies, sexual and reproductive health, gender-based violence, youth homelessness, and accessibility and accommodations in higher education. Roxanne McKittiuk is a professor at Osgoode Hall Law School, where she engages in research and teaching in the areas of disability law, health law, bioethics, and family law. She is the founder and director of the Disability Law Intensive Clinical Program and the director of Osgoode's part-time LLM program, specializing in health law. And finally, Brooke Miguel is a master's student in the School of Health Policy and Management at York. Her research interests are primarily concerned with the social determinants of mental health, critical disability theory, new genetics, and the post-Holocaust memory. I'd like to welcome Iris, Kate, Roxanne, and Brooke. It's a pleasure having you here with us today. However, Iris and Katie will be presenting, and then Roxanne and Brooke will join us for the Q&A. Hi, Katie.
Hi.
And hi, Iris. Welcome, and I'll turn the floor over to you. Take it away.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for the Scholar Hub for inviting us. My name is Iris Epstein, and I will start this presentation just creating a little bit of a context to Katie's focus on the video methodology, the asynchronized video methodology. This particular research project is really inspired and led by Roxanne and I within our overall program of research around supporting students who identify with disability in clinical placement. The overall goal of this particular ACTon project is to develop multimedia resources online and offline to support students who identify with disability and registered with the Students Access Center, and students who identify with disability not registered with the Access Center, and their instructor around their communication needs in clinical placement. Now, clinical placement are really important learning placement. And you can have a very popular example of clinical placement is teachers who goes to schools to practice teaching. And in nursing, clinical placement are really important places like we have hospitals, outpatient clinic, community, and of course in law and other discipline. Many program clinical placement are mandatory, and students in fact cannot graduate without clinical placement. So understanding the experiences and the communication need of students who identify with disability and instructor around clinical placement are really important. And this project, what we are using, the particular asynchronized video methodology is such a unique way, given the COVID and the challenges with the COVID. And it's kind of, if you see in the slide, it's kind of a conversation between the students creating their videos, stories, and the clinical instructor responding to the student video stories. And then we had an overall focus group understanding their the students' responses and to the clinical instructor video. We have used several disciplines at York University: nursing, social work, education, kinesiology, and law. And having had their students' video. And of course, the overall goal is to create the resources that will have two interactive scripts, promising practices, and other resources. I will pass now the baton to Katie to really focus and zoom in around the video methodology, as this is the focus of this presentation. Thank you again.
Hi, thank you, Iris. Yeah, so today I really want to focus on the first phase of our research and data collection methods. And that really had one primary goal, which was to meaningfully consult students with disabilities and placement instructors to learn about how they negotiate placement accommodations. But as we planned this process, I was also really interested in learning about how we could integrate participatory visual methods to encourage dialogue between these two groups, the students with disabilities and instructors. But we also recognize that there are sort of inherent power dynamics between these two groups, and we were worried that this might impact engagement in the process. So that's what really pushed us towards following an asynchronous dialogue using participatory video method, which I'll kind of walk you through in a minute. But before I do that, I just wanted to also point to a further consideration that we had when we were planning the work, which was to really develop a process of participatory video method that was inclusive and accessible. So this idea of accommodations, while it's the topic of our research, it was actively negotiated and considered from the beginning of the project in the doing of the data collection. So describing the steps and the strategies that we used to attempt to make our data collection process as inclusive as possible is really the focus of what I'm getting at today. And finally, as Iris mentioned, we planned this work in 2019 when we were putting the grant proposal together, but we conducted the data collection this summer, 2020. So as so many of us had to do, we had to adapt everything kind of last minute to COVID-19. And for the most part, that meant moving everything online. So this is sort of a process of exploring the impact of that online shift as well. So participatory video method centers on research participants creating video as research data, as well as having those videos as representations of knowledge. So when we were considering the adaptations we needed to make as a result of COVID, we piloted a group-based participatory video method over Zoom. We did this with members of our research team, and the process was generally a success. Everybody created a video, which was great, but I decided to work one-on-one with participants, and then that was after that experience, because I felt like the group method was a little bit harder to negotiate online. So having one-on-one meetings online would allow for deeper engagement with ideas. It would support our participants in the video production process, and it would always allow for sort of some rapport building between myself and the participants. So I started by meeting with students first. And before our meeting, I produced and distributed a workshop guide, a video workshop guide. So this was a 27-page document that contained all of the information about the research process. It had the information about the consent process, including videos describing what that would mean. It had our interview questions. It also had useful links to video making resources like the SMART toolbox, which Iris was involved in producing, as well as example videos that research participants had made in other projects unrelated to accommodation and in placements. So the guide was distributed first, and then I would meet with first our student participants. We'd obtain informed consent, and then we started an interview, which was approximately 1 hour, where we explored the participants' experiences and perspectives on accommodation and placement. And this led directly into a sort of 2-hour facilitated video production process. So I say facilitated because I really want to emphasize that this work is, well, it's first just developed out of some of the work that I've done around cell film method, and it includes several steps that are intended to support participants to really think through the audio-visual production that they are creating, as well as the messaging that they are going to put into their video content. So videos were created in response to a prompt, which was challenges and successes of communicating about accommodation before and during placement. and participants could choose whether they wanted to identify themselves in their film. And that was predicated on a discussion that we had about the benefits and risks of identifying themselves, both the risks to themselves as well as their intended audience. So I met with 13 participants in total, and we produced 12 videos. So following the student meetings, I met one-on-one with instructors. Instructors also got a copy of a workshop guide, and this supported us as we went through the consent process and the interview process. But before we jumped into video production with the instructors, what we did was we showed them 4 examples of the students' videos. So these were 4 videos randomly chosen, but they represented sort of the 4 key faculties that we were working with. So students, a video from a student from law, a video from a student from education, social work, and health. And then once we'd watched those 3 videos, instructors were asked to make their own videos in response to the prompt, speaking back about challenges and successes of communicating about accommodations during placement. But this prompt later morphed into this idea of speaking forward about challenges and successes. So this offered a directional latitude to instructors that we felt was important, and we realized sort of midway through the process. So where earlier videos tended to have an audience of students speaking back to students, later videos spoke, some of them spoke more or in addition to instructors, colleagues, or even the higher education institution, in most of the cases York or universities. So to give you an example of this idea of speaking back and speaking forward, I'm going to show you an instructor video. It was created by one of our participants from the Faculty of Education. Her name is Melanie, and she generously agreed for us to screen her video today. And what I really want to draw your attention to in Melanie's video is how she is speaking back to the student videos that she watched, talking about the fear and the sense of burden that some students might feel having to always be the one to come forward and activate their accommodations and placement. But then I also want you to note how Melanie really focuses on speaking forward to her peers, her colleagues, to explore different strategies that they can use to better support and encourage students in placement. So I'll just pull that up now. Oops. Nope, wrong one again, sorry. Sorry about this.
Hi. Today we're looking at skills needed to encourage students to share their accommodation needs. I've been with York University for 15 years in the facilitation of practicum and teaching many courses, and I wanted to share this idea with you today. I've been in education for around 40 years and love it and hope that I continue. The first skill that we learn is communication. Communication and encouraging students to share in your first class if they have an accommodation, giving them time to share. It could be a time after class, it could be sending you an email, give them a couple of options, because it's a very sometimes courageous thing for a student to do. When they do share with you, forgive their messaging. I have a saying of putting an old head on a young body as I get older is tough, because sometimes they share it in a demanding way. They don't mean to, but it just takes courage, and so sometimes the communication can be a little bit harsh. The second skill we learn when kids are being encouraged to share accommodations with you is the following up skills. Continue to follow up accommodations by encouraging students to continue sharing successes and challenges with us as we're teaching our courses. Throughout the classes, continue to listen to how the accommodations are working or not working. As we continue developing our skills of active listening, open-mindedness, caring, and responsive education, we continue to help those students take the risk of sharing the accommodations with us and meeting those accommodation needs with them. The third set of skills we need as we learn about accommodating our students is how to support ourselves when they tell us about their accommodations, because sometimes it seems to mean extra work for us as teachers. You can get ideas from Student Access Center, or you can get Student Counseling and Development Center ideas of how to help with accommodation specifically. What may motivate you to continue experimenting with ideas to accommodate students is the thank you messages that you got from past students for helping them, whether they were nonverbal or verbal messages. And then also pedagogical conversations and support from our colleagues help us to motivate us to continue to accommodate. The takeaway that accommodating and listening to accommodations for our students do for us is that the students will appreciate our helpfulness as we build a risk-taking learning community in our classes. We will continue expanding our instructional strategies by learning with and from our students. We will also further develop our skills of communication, because they are sharing some very personal information with us, and sometimes it comes with a lot of risks and a lot of hurt in their past. We also will build positive relationships with our students, and finally we will model inclusive teaching.
Okay. So that was Melanie's video, but we collected, I think, 22 videos in total from all of our participants, that's students and instructors. These are some screenshots of other videos. I wish I could show you them all, but who has time for that? So our next step in the research process was to analyze all of these videos. We wanted to try to make sense of what they all meant. And we wanted to do this in a participatory fashion. So we did this, and in particular, we were interested, as Iris mentioned, in hearing from the students, because the instructors had had a chance to see some of the student videos. We wanted to give students a chance to see some of the instructors, if not all of the instructors' videos. So we did this in what we called screening focus groups. And this involved bringing small groups of students together over Zoom, of course, to watch the videos and identify key themes and decision points in each of the individual videos, as well as across the video collection as a whole. And we incorporated several strategies to support the students' engagement in this analysis process. So, and many of these were integrated prior to the focus group. So we prepared the visual material for people to engage with it. So we included subtitles, as you saw in Melanie's video. We also wrote up video descriptions of each of the videos and circulated that for folks. In the weeks leading up to the event, the focus groups, we held office hours with when participants could come and meet us over Zoom, or at least a member of the research team, and they would be walked through the analysis process, introduced to what we were going to be doing, and also they had an opportunity to pre-screen some, if not all, of the videos. We produced an ACTon project Moodle, or if you're a York person, this was an online e-class interface that allowed participants to engage with the screening focus group material that includes all the videos. They could engage with that Moodle on their own time. And this was a great strategy, but we did have some challenges of actually getting participants access to the Moodle. We distributed, I will say too, we planned for 2 focus groups at different times of the day and of the week to accommodate different people's schedules. And then we distributed an analysis guide that included all of the information about the focus group, similar to the workshop guide that I produced earlier. So this included information about using Zoom and how to maintain anonymity on Zoom in a group setting. It had focus group questions in it. It also contained an analysis handout, which was really a key support in allowing students or supporting students to engage in the analysis process. It encouraged them to identify up to 3 themes or key decision points that they saw in each of the individual videos, and then also to identify 3 key themes or decisions that they saw across the video collection as it relates to students and as it relates to instructors. So that's sort of a screen grab that you're seeing there on the slide of a semi-completed handout from one of our participants. So that brought us to the focus group itself, where we screened all of the videos to the students. And then we engaged in our focus group, talking about what we saw, what we'd learned, how we were making sense of these things. And to capture that process, we used the Zoom whiteboard function. And that's a screen grab of one of our whiteboards that we used during one of the focus groups. So these are collaborative whiteboards. Everyone can contribute to the board. That's why you see different types of writing on the board. And it allowed us to mark down our key ideas. We could show relationships between these ideas using arrows. People could use stamps to indicate the points that they thought were most important. In this particular screen grab, you can see the hearts as stamps. So this was one of the participants saying, I think this is a really important idea. We need to remember it. Yeah, so that was a really neat feature that I think we found quite helpful in our focus group. So those were all the strategies that we used, I think, or almost all of them. I'm going to stop there. I'm going to hand the mic over to Roxanne to close, but I will say that I'm hoping that we can maybe talk about some of the challenges and successes of all of these strategies in our discussion, if that is of interest to folks. Thanks, Roxanne.
Thanks. Am I up? Okay. So I have the lovely task of thanking people. First of all, I just want to thank those of you who have come out today. We're going to move to question and answer shortly. But I also want to thank the AIF fund for actually funding the research that we've been doing. We wouldn't have been able to do this without their generous funding. You'll see that we have had a very comprehensive and interdisciplinary team of collaborators who have facilitated and worked with us on this project, and they are all listed on the slide that you have up on the screen before you. I'm not going to read it all, but they are all listed there. We have been drawing on their expertise throughout the project, and we will going into the new year as well. We're also very grateful for the students who have worked with us on the project and who have been extremely integral. And as you know, we are only partway through the project. All of the work that we've done so far is actually feeding into a script writing project, and that is going to use the material that has been generated that we are in the process of writing scripts, which will then be used to write the multimedia tool that will be generated. And we hope to be able to come back next year and actually feature that multimedia tool for you. So I'll close the thanks and turn it over to the question and answer period.
Thank you so much for that, sharing your research. And clearly the work is very impactful and lots still to learn. I'd like to just invite Iris and Brooke to join on screen as well. And if Katie and Roxanne can stay. We do have time for our audience to ask questions that they may have for you. If you are watching us on Zoom, just use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And if you're watching us on Facebook, we do have a few. You can submit your questions through the comment box of the video. So we'll just start with, let me just check here. Okay, so we're just going to start with a few questions. Could you share maybe either Brooke or Katie, if you can maybe start with this, the challenges and successes of using different techniques, accommodation techniques? Excuse me.
Would you like me to take this one, Katie?
Pardon?
Would you like me to take this one?
Go for it.
Sure. So I think there were so many successes that we actually had, which we did not actually intend. Also with, as Katie talked about, due to COVID, a lot of things had to transition online. So we really tried to make sure that the successes were things that we did that were proactive instead of reactive. So something that Katie mentioned is in the focus groups, for example, we had multiple ways of discussion. And I think that was a really important thing is not everyone's comfortable turning on their audio in Zoom. So we enabled them to use the chat function as well as use the audio function. We also had an amazing person come in and do live transcriptions, which were super helpful for everyone and anyone who wanted to turn on closed captioning. So not just for people that necessarily needed it for accommodation purposes. And maybe one of the challenges that we had was access to Moodle, which Katie was kind of alluding to, was the fact that we wanted to give participants access to this Moodle so they could have time and before the focus groups to actually view all the videos, because it can be kind of overwhelming to just do this entire process in one single focus group. So we wanted to ensure that students all had access to that so that they could take the time to view those ahead of time. But the issue that we had with Moodle is just kind of figuring out how can all participants use it, because some participants were alumni at York and did have difficulty with accessing the Moodle. Katie, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear your perspective on it too. I didn't really give Brooke enough props in when I was talking earlier. Brooke was really integral in supporting me in a lot of the focus group functioning and hearing from students. So I'm really grateful for that support. And so yeah, it's really interesting to hear your feedback, and thank you for mentioning some of the accommodation sort of thinking that I didn't include in my presentation. I think on a sort of a larger scale, some of the bigger themes that were happening around accommodation for this work was this idea of transparency, trying to be as transparent and upfront about what we were about to do with folks, or what we were asking and inviting folks to engage with, so that they had all the information that they needed to kind of themselves get ahead and up in front of what they might need to engage on their own level. So and it's funny because I think we were doing this, and then we really heard this again in the data that we collected later, which is you know, when you're going into a placement, for example, a clinical placement, a practicum, you don't necessarily know what you're walking into. You don't know what to expect. So all the information that you can have up front helps you to predict what you may or may not need, or what things might need to be adapted for you to be able to really flourish in that setting. So that's why things like the guide, having these office hours and the Moodle setup were so helpful to sort of let people know what they were about to do. But then we had to balance this with time, both our own time and effort and ability to produce all of this extra, not extra, I should say, but it should really be included, probably in all data and research, but to sort of create space for that, as well as, though, I mean, obviously our participants have very busy lives, and we did this all as like the pandemic started, so everyone was kind of like, what's going on in addition. So trying to really respect folks' schedules and ability and how much time they had to engage in the process. So, but what I want to avoid is this idea that it's just extra time, that people just need extra time. No, what they need is substantive support and thinking, I should say, and how do we create spaces that people can meaningfully engage with? And so that's so much bigger than time. And also to sort of speak back to what Brooke was saying about the Moodle and getting folks access to the Moodle, or the e-class, I guess it would be now at York. I would say that this also talks to a larger sort of systemic issue in how we're supporting research at York, in creating and having access to the digital sites and supports that we need to create these spaces that are both secure. I mean, we needed a place that we could post our participants' videos that would be secure, that would allow other participants to view them without putting them, you know, publicly on the net. We couldn't put them on YouTube. We couldn't put them on Facebook. These sites aren't secure enough for us. So we needed a site that was able to do that we could engage with, and that we could control who had access to. So I think that is an institutional, and I'm not fluent in what resources are out there in York, but certainly we struggle to find a site that would really allow us to do that. So that would be sort of a larger statement or ask that I think us as a team, I won't speak for everyone, would support moving forward.
Yeah, that's great. No, thanks for that. You know, I think we have a second question here. I think you both sort of partially answered it already, but just can only imagine the challenges and hurdles and the reframing you needed to do to use this method during COVID, you know, where you were sort of planning to do something more face-to-face versus having to shift it to online, and the type of support and changes you needed for that. Another question that we have is how do you choose whose stories get told? I don't know if Iris, you want to take that one?
This is a really interesting interesting point, and whose story should we tell? So, is it the student's story? Is it one student over another? Is it one faculty story about accommodation and placement over another? Is it also within us, the researcher? As we mentioned, we have a huge research team, and some are staff and faculty that are actually expert and work with students with disability in placement. So the question of whose stories should be highlighted and should be told is has a lot of interesting implication and insights, right? I mean, as one particular struggle should be highlighted, there's some students were telling us some secrets. This is how they do, this is how they come, this is how they do. We reveal those secret stories? So there's a lot of stories are really important sources of data in terms of also how they're being told the story, and which story is more important than who. And that's why we really want to come back next year, because we will try to perhaps present how we address this whose story should be told, and what should we have done, because that's an important issue that we are dealing with right now when we are trying to analyze and make sense of all those videos, right? Because you have all those 22 videos, and how do you bring all the stories together and which stories to highlight? Anybody wants to, Roxanne or Katie or Brooke, what are some of your thoughts about whose stories?
I think one of the issues that also circumscribes this a bit is that we continuously watched the videos, and we also read the transcripts and coded them, right? So that there were certain themes that were constantly coming up. And so that also, there's a sense in which we could not go beyond the data, right? We had to stay true to the data. And so in the purpose of, or one of the purposes anyway, of having a number of students and then a number of instructors creating their own videos is so that we could actually gain those perspectives on and insights about those individuals' experiences of accommodations and placements. And from there, build the multimedia scripts that we have, and that are then going to become the base of the multimedia tool. And so we have had to find a way of coding those individual videos and reading across for commonalities and themes, right? So you can't necessarily prefer one story. You've got to, in a sense, come up with an amalgam of stories and code the data for similarities. So the data, in a sense, restricts also, in a sense, the narrative or the story that one can tell. I don't know whether the other members of the group would agree with me, but my sense is that that has also constrained, in a way, some of the things that we have been able to say. Katie, jump in.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I do agree with you. I think the other piece that is really interesting to think about, though, is when we have these stories, we have this knowledge too. I don't want to diminish what folks have shared with us, that and that we want to honor that really in this resource that we're creating, and we want to say, listen, we consulted the experts on this, and this is, we have learned some really important information that we have to share. And right now we're really focused on scripting these videos, these interactive videos that people will engage with, and I think by going through this process, we're also thinking about what stories, the question for me right now is what stories are best told in what way? And to explain that, it's like, so we have these scripts, these videos that we're hoping to create based on all of this data that we've collected that will represent some stories, but maybe not all the stories. So some of the knowledge, but maybe not all of the knowledge. So what knowledge is important to tell via an interactive video script, and what knowledge is important to share in other ways, like best practices and other resources in classroom integration tools, in discussion questions, and these sorts of things. So so the end product, which we do hope to come back and talk about, is so much more expansive than these sort of productions the video productions we have. So, and I think that raises really interesting questions around, for me at least, in terms of participatory or the visual method, maybe not so participatory at this point, in terms of like what knowledge is best represented in the video format, and what knowledge is better represented maybe in a more text-based format or in a tool format. So I think that's really exciting.
Right. When you say, Katie, when you said sort of what stories are best told in what way, when you say in what way, is this where, so I know that your call was we need sort of better infrastructure and support to be able to collect the stuff from the university. We don't have sort of secure ways to sort of collect the videos. When you think about sharing it or telling the stories, in what way, what kind of resources or platforms are you looking for to do that?
So
we have the stories. In what way? In what way are you sharing them?
Yeah, so this final resource that we're hoping to produce as the ACTon resource, that all of this we've been consulting the students and instructors for, will sort of be a home, a website. As I'm not a technical.
That's fine. A website makes sense.
But the website will have a host of information that's going to be, and the glory or bane of the internet these days is that it offers us so many opportunities. So it can host what we're scripting right now, which is these interactive videos, but it can also, through these videos that we're going to produce, with actors, we can also embed links, for example, to other resources. The videos themselves will be on a page that also holds other information about, what are accommodations, what's the legal implications, for example, of accommodations and placement, and how can we share that knowledge around, like, what are students' actual rights to accommodation and placement? Do they have to register with a student access center, or can they just, do they have to have a confirmed diagnosis from a doctor? There's so much more information that has real and direct implications on students' ability to access their right to accommodation and placement that may or may not be sort of communicatable through this video format, right? So and the web format allows us a lot of different ways to represent that knowledge, and so it was sort of exploring those opportunities. And I think that's kind of where we're at right now, is making those decisions. What do we do this way? What do we do that way?
It's also important to say that this AIF project is a part of a huge project, my program of research. So another SSHRC Insight funded project that I'm leading is actually understanding what is a resource and what do we mean by resource, and Is a resource is a thing, or is a resource is an offline, is it online, is it, because so this is just a small, I don't want to say small, it is, but the scripts are just one aspect, and the other project that I'm involved is trying to understand what is a resource, where we are actually collaborating with placement placement institution, hospital, community, offline, you know, and understanding what are their needs and what do we mean by resource, what the term resource mean. And Brooke is in here. She's leading some of the literature review and the resources we collected. So that's a good question that you brought, Carrie, about how you're going to host it. What do you mean? Where are you going to, how it's going to look like? Because it's a kind of a negotiating. There's this possibility, variation of, right? So we hope to come back next year.
Yes. We have time for one more question, if you may. So the question is, how do we balance the project's interdisciplinary commitments? Sorry, I'm tongue-tied today a little bit, but I don't know if Roxanne, you want to try to take that, or?
Yeah, I can start with this one. So, you know, I guess we start from the premise, as Iris pointed out at the very beginning, that there are a number of principally professional programs, right, that have various kinds of placements as either requirements of their programs, or in the case of law, as options, although articling certainly is a requirement for students. So students with disabilities, as part of their education, right, have to have access to clinical placements, or some kinds of placements. And in order, and we know that in the classroom they are able to receive accommodations. We're not good, though, at thinking about accommodations in clinical placements. The university is not good at that. We as instructors are not good at that, and we don't have systems set up for that. Generically, I think generically for students in the classroom, there are fairly determined kinds of accommodations that students receive across disciplines, right? But in different kinds of placements, the kinds of accommodations that a student would need in nursing, right, when the kind of experience that you're getting in a placement in terms of prescribing meds, turning a patient, putting in an IV, is going to be very different from what my student is going to be doing in terms of interviewing clients, drafting FACTA, etc. So the actual skills requirements for accommodations are going to be quite different. And so what we've done is, first of all, ensure that we have a highly interdisciplinary team, so that we're able to actually bounce around the ideas amongst ourselves. And we do have really interesting discussions, right, about when we've been drafting the scripts, for example, about, no, that's not the right term that one would use. It has to be more generic, because somebody in X discipline isn't going to understand what that term is going to be. So because we're wanting to make a tool that is actually going to be accessible and generalizable across disciplines, we actually have to have discussions to ensure that. So there's that kind of adaptability that has had to happen. At the same time, the requirements around accommodations are the same, right? Students have a right to accommodation in placements. The law is the same. Many of the barriers are the same. Students are fearful about disclosing their accommodation needs, especially if they're a student who has an invisible disability, because they don't want to be perceived as weak, because they are concerned about getting hired back, because they're concerned about getting a reference, because they're concerned about getting assigned work that's not as important, right? If they, for example, if they're a student who has an obvious disability, there are other issues that are common amongst the placements. On the other hand, if you're an instructor, right, again, regardless of your discipline, there are also going to be common issues. Do you ask your students? How do you ask your students? Where do you go for courses? What are the systemic issues, right? So we've had to navigate those kinds of issues and also consult with our collaborators. Iris and I come from different disciplines. Katie and Brooke are, again, differently situated. So we have a team of experts. We have an independent team of experts who we consult with. So we're always checking to ensure that at a granular level, what we're saying is generalizable, but that the issues themselves are common amongst the disciplines as well.
Right, right. So many perspectives that you have to consider. Go ahead, Iris. Were you going to say something?
To add to Roxanne, it makes me sometimes reflect how I've been working with Roxanne is the power of learning from each other. You know, many disciplines are silos. They're working. This is our way, a regulatory body. And in education, I think we have this amazing opportunities to learn from different disciplines. What is their process of accommodation? How do they work things out? How do they interact with the Students Access Center? And how we can learn the process and how we can, that's not so rigid, creating possibilities and multiplicity, of venue and avenue. And I think this is the unique, really a great experience for me. And I'm so blessed really to work with Roxanne and Katie and Brooke here, because you really learn, oh, we can do it this way. Oh, there is options, and so I think this is an important piece to say, that while we are on our discipline and we have our own expectation and competency, and that should be respected and honored, there's also a space where we can learn differently. And in education is a great opportunities to teach our students and ourselves how to be in the real world, in the clinical world, So I think you can have those great exchanges. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So many perspectives that you're bringing to the work as scholars, and then so many perspectives you need to consider in terms of the individuals in the placement, right? There's so many different, we talked about the prof versus the teacher, or the prof versus the student, like so many perspectives. This is very, as even myself and my team are learning, just very critical work and complex work, and really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Thank you so much for sharing this work with us, and we look forward to hearing more about it in the new year for sure. So thank you.
Thank you.
We are at about time for our questions, so we don't have any more time for questions. So I'm going to just wrap up. But before we say goodbye to you and our audience, we want to thank you all again for taking the time to join us. We will make a version of today's lecture available with closed captioning as well. We do have one last poll question for our audience, as we are planning for our Scholars Hub webinars in 2021, which is just a few months away. We really do welcome your feedback. The question is, and it should be up on your screen now, what would you like to see as part of the Scholars Hub at Home experience in the new year? It should pop up, it should be up there now, and you can take a moment to respond. Really appreciate your feedback. As you know, when we started this series in April, about a month after the shutdown, we just constantly are trying to listen to you and bring you topics and experiences that you're looking for. So thank you so much for the feedback. Okay, yes. So feel free to share today's talk with your friends. It will be posted on our YouTube channel, our York Alumni YouTube channel. You may also join our LinkedIn group and follow us on Facebook by searching York University Alumni, and follow us on Twitter or Instagram at YorkU Alumni. We're always interested in hearing about topics that you're interested in, and always open to your suggestions. You can also email us at alumni@yorku.ca. Also, just a reminder that Scholars Hub at Home is held weekly, Wednesdays at noon. Next week on Wednesday, November 25th, we'll be joined by Deborah J. Pepler, Professional of Psychology in the Faculty of Health, to discuss how relationships are essential to health. To learn more about these events and to see our lineup through to December, please visit our website at yorku.ca/alumni and friends and click on events. Thank you so much for joining us today, and be well.